Hello, everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the fifth book of the Hebrew Bible and is part of the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch refers to the first 5 books of the Bible, which have been traditionally believed to be written by Moses. The book of Deuteronomy presents a summary of the narratives from Exodus to Numbers and repeats the law God gave to Israel up to this point. The title for this book comes from the Greek translation of Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 18, which speaks of a king having a copy of the law. So the word literally means second law, but it was referring to a renewal or a copy of the covenant God gave to Israel through Moses. So the setting of this book is that the new generation of Israelites after the Exodus was about to enter the promised land. This generation, besides Joshua and Caleb, has not witnessed the miracle of God parting the Red Sea or heard the law given through Moses. Therefore, they needed to be reminded of God's law and the future dangers and temptations they will face in a new land. Now, the best way to structure Deuteronomy is to view it through the lens of Moses' Pharaoh speeches. Deuteronomy records 3 Pharaoh speeches Moses gave to this generation that had grown up in the wilderness the past 40 years. His first speech is recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6 to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 40, and it recaps Israel's history up to this point. Moses describes Israel's journey from Sinai to Moab, and Moses uses Israel's history to urge this new generation to trust God and obey His commandments. The second speech is recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 44 to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, and this is the longest part of the book. Moses explains God's law and goes through many instructions for how to live life in the new land. Moses repeats the 10 commandments, and Deuteronomy chapter 5 to 11 emphasize the theme of loving God, or the first commandment, while Deuteronomy chapter 12 through 26 goes over the legal laws for Israel, which expound the other 9 commandments. Let me zoom in and show you how this speech is structured around the 10 commandments. Deuteronomy chapter 6 through 11 has to do with commandments regarding worship, which refers to the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. Then Deuteronomy chapter 12 to 13 warns against idolatry, which refers to the second commandment, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. Then we see that Deuteronomy chapter 14 deals with rules regarding clean and unclean food, which comments on the issue of holiness. This refers to the third commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. This commandment has nothing to do with curse words, but is forbidding a person to use God's name or His reputation the wrong way. In other words, it is misusing God, which undermines His holiness. Then in Deuteronomy chapter 15 through Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 17, we see regulations regarding the Sabbath, feast, and festivals, which all have to do with resting from normal work. This alludes to the fourth commandment where God commanded Israel to observe the Sabbath. Then in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18 to Deuteronomy chapter 18, we see how to uphold and honor leaders such as priests, judges, and kings. This refers to the fifth commandment about honoring one's father and mother because it shares a common theme of honoring and submitting to higher authority. Then Deuteronomy chapter 19 through 22 verse 8, it deals with the issues of war and death, which refers to the sixth commandment forbidding murder. Then Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 9 through Deuteronomy chapter 25, it deals with the topic of sexual immorality, divorce, and marriage, which alludes to the seventh commandment that forbids adultery. Intertwined in this same section are commandments dealing with how to manage one's land and how to deal with other people's land, which comments on the eighth commandment, which forbids stealing. Then Deuteronomy chapters 24 to 25 comment on how to interact with others rightly, which alludes to the ninth commandment regarding not bearing false witness or dealing honestly with other people. Finally, Deuteronomy chapters 25 to 26 gives commandments on one's duty to others and God, such as giving tithes and first fruits, which alludes to the final covenant to not covet. So we see how Moses' second speech expounds on the 10 commandments, which leads to Deuteronomy chapters 27 to 28, where Moses divides Israel and has half of them stand on Mount Ebal and the other half on Mount Gerizim. Mount Ebal represented curses while Mount Gerizim represented blessings. So Moses performs a memorial ceremony as an object lessons and has those standing on Mount Gerizim to repeat the blessings from the law, and those standing on Mount Ebal to repeat the curses from the law. Then we come to Moses' third and final speech in Deuteronomy chapters 29 to 30. This speech warns Israel of the consequences of rebelling against God, namely death. However, Moses mentioned that if Israel did trust and obey God, then they will experience blessings in the new land. Now, having seen the overall structure of Deuteronomy, we find several theological themes from this book. First, we see the theme of land. One of the main themes of Deuteronomy and the Pentateuch as a whole is that God promised a specific land for Israel. There are about 66 references to the land as God's gift, and Israel is told 69 times to go and inherit that land. A second theme is God's love for his people. Deuteronomy emphasizes God's continual love for Israel. He reminds them that his election of them is purely out of his mercy and not their merits. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you are the fewest of all peoples. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. The third and final theme in Deuteronomy is the need to remember. God calls Israel to remember what he has done for them, especially when he delivered them from Egypt. The Exodus story is not just a historical event, but something that must be repeatedly reminded to Israel into their future. Remembering was an act that both recalled the past and demanded action. The need to remember highlights the importance of God's word, since a person cannot remember God's word until he or she first knows God's word. I think this final theme is especially applicable to Christians. Although we are not Israel and no longer live under the Mosaic law, we are still responsible to remember God's words just like Israel. We are reminded that nobody is above God's law, not even a leader like Moses. If you remember, Moses disobeyed God's clear command and could not enter the promised land because of his disobedience. Look at how Jesus responded to Satan's temptation in the wilderness by quoting the book of Deuteronomy 3 times. As Israel remembered God's faithfulness, so should we. The crossing of the Red Sea, the giving of God's law at Sinai, and the blessing of manna reminded Israel of God's continual protection and provision. And the God who did this for Israel is the same God who provides and protects for the church today. Take you to today's sponsor, Awe and Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the book of Numbers, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. Until next time, see you.